Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with the top decks in the Modern format and just kind of a general overview of the Modern format in general. If you do like the Modern format, especially with guides and a few specific decks in mind, we primarily play Jund, Saga, Amulet Titan on this channel, as well as try to give general overviews and strategy guides for every deck in the Modern format. Currently working on 8-rack on the current deck guide series, along with some quick hits videos with that deck in mind. That said, Modern is kind of entered a familiar place, but kind of a strange place. So obviously the banning of Fury and Up the Beanstalk was supposed to kind of stabilize the Modern format. And a lot of people surmised that certain decks would kind of rise, certain decks would kind of fall. A lot of people expected Rakdos Scam to kind of take a step back, and that Yawgmoth, Amulet, possibly Rhinos would take a step forward. And to a certain degree, that's happened. Now, in a weird sort of way, people continue to overplay certain decks. The two decks that continue to get overplayed a little bit are Rakdos Scam and Is It Murktide, which will, spoilers, be in this top 5, top 6 deck lists. That's not to say they're bad decks, it's just simply to say that they're a little overrepresented for their matchup spread against some of the other top decks. The first deck we're going to take a look at, which would be probably number 5 or number 6, depending on if you're looking at popularity or power of the decks, etc. And that is one of the two Cascade sister decks, that is Living End. Now, Living End is a deck that is a Cascade deck into an equivalent of Living Death, which takes all of your creatures in play, puts them in the graveyard, all the creatures in the graveyard puts them into play. You cycle a bunch of cards, put them into play, and try to win the game that way. Now this is a deck that is not particularly new to the format. It's been around in a lot of different forms. Its original incarnation was a Jund variant. Then there was this kind of weird version that had Electro Balance and As Foretold, and then it's kind of evolved into this blue cycling deck that it is now, obviously powered up by the blue cycling creatures, Force of Negation, Grief, Subtlety, those kind of things. And one of the newer things that a lot of them have been taking on is a little bit more of a black concentration. Not only be able to cast your black spells, but actually access Troll of Khazad-dûm. Not sure if this version is more popular than the almost straight Teamer variant, but you do have a lot of powerful disruption in the form of Grief, Force of Negation, and Subtlety to protect your combo, and then, you have a lot of things to fight through in the post-board games, so generally have a mixture of anti-hate cards, whether it be anti-graveyard stuff, anti-counterspell stuff, anti-cascade stuff. It's really kind of what the deck comes down to. Game 1 is usually fairly straightforward with the deck. Game 2 and Game 3 is learning about fighting through the hate. That's why maybe this is a little bit further down than a deck like Teamer Rhinos. Now, kind of echoing a little bit the words of Andre Mengucci, Rakdos Scam did not have a great weekend in Europe. It had an excellent weekend in Brazil, so this is a deck that had a bit of mixed results over the weekend. Now, this deck certainly took a hit with loss of Fury. You no longer have Hogak that wipes your opponent's board on turn 1, but you still have what most people consider the more broken thing, which is Grief, double thought seizing your opponent, leaving behind a 4/3 creature with Not Dead after all. And I think one thing that was downplayed a lot was this was actually a very good mid-range deck, especially in post-board games when your opponents would bring in like Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, things to fight the graveyard combo of the deck. This deck just turned out to be a very good mid-range deck. Now, it didn't compete on a power level with decks like 4-Color Omnath or Creativity or those kind of decks, but it was still a solid mid-range deck. And now you still have kind of this interesting balance of mid-range tools along with the early pressure provided by Grief, Ragavan, Orcish Masters, Dothi Voidwalker. You're starting to see more mid-range cards sneak into the deck like Kroxa, Bone Crusher Giant, etc. So this is still a fairly solid deck, but is a little overrepresented for how good it is. Now, Blood Moon is certainly a big part of this deck's success. Blood Moon is a key card against Amulet, Titan, and Tron in particular. Helps in some other matchups. But a lot of other decks are fairly well prepared for Blood Moon or play Blood Moon themselves, so that angle of attack is not always the best. But this is still probably the best mid-range deck with a little bit of a broken Modern Horizons play, and that's really kind of the the takeaway of the Modern format is if you want to be doing well, generally you have to be playing Modern Horizons cards in your deck, and it be a centerpiece of your deck, which, well, unfortunate, or I guess you could argue Modern Horizons 2.5, Lord of the Rings, playing either the One Ring or Orcs Bowmasters, or both, in order for your deck to have a fairly reasonable time in the meta right now. Number 4, Murktide. Now, there's a lot of different things going on with Murktide, but basically it comes down to how many Murktide Regions you're running, how many Ledger Shredders you're running, and then what is your composition of some of your tertiary spells. How many bolts are you running? How many spell pierces are you running? How many stern scolding, spell snares, etc. Now, this deck is very good against other combo-ish decks, combo decks like Amulet, and struggles a little bit in some of the other matchups, especially the more attrition-based matchups. So Amulet, this is one of those decks that really shines or gets hurt by your choice of cards, because between Preordain, Mishra's Bauble, Dragon Rage's Channeler, Ledger Shredder, Expressive Iteration, you're going to see a lot of cards. So deck building with this deck is an art, and certainly is a make or break thing. One build of Murktide can be really good for a weekend, another build can be absolutely terrible, and you have bad results. And this is a deck with, well, it gives you a lot of choices, does give you a lot of room for error, and may be a little overrepresented in the meta as a result, but still fairly solid, reasonable deck. It's one of the 2 tempo decks in the format that are quite good, it and Rhinos, but this one's a little bit weaker, despite maybe seeing a little bit more play than it should for its results. Number 3 is a deck that I'm starting to pick up and learn a little bit more seriously than I have. I've kind of come to the conclusion that even though I have a Modern Burn channel and I play Jund Saga as the primary deck on this channel, if you want to go into a bigger event and have a reasonable chance of success in Modern as things currently stand, at least till Modern Horizons 3 drops, you have to be playing one of the top 5 or 6 decks and really know it inside and out. Now, I've played Rakdos Scam, the old version, and I've played Murktide, both a fairly decent amount. Both decks are fine, but Jund kind of fits that kind of mid-range mold already. Rhinos, I already play a fairly simplistic, straightforward deck with Burn, so that doesn't necessarily appeal to me. Living End's a weird one because Game 1 is very easy with the deck. Game 2 and Game 3 got quite tricky. And I don't always like struggling with sideboarding as much as that deck can present sometimes. So that really leaves down to Yawgmoth versus Amulet. Now, Yawgmoth is a creature combo deck with a lot of resiliency, a lot of tools. Got a huge boost with, I guess, the Soul Cauldron. Amulet is more of a deck that has historically been considered a very difficult deck to play. Now, the sequencing can still be a little bit tricky with this deck, but as the deck has gained more tools, the Mycosynth Gardens, Urza's Saga, the One Ring, you have a lot more capable hands, a lot less hands with air in them, and I have found this deck to be enjoyable, although you still have those room for mistakes, as you'll see in an Amulet video that I have coming out soon, and as I'm starting to take learning the deck a little bit more seriously. Now, that said, I still think Amulet might be the most powerful pound-for-pound deck in the format, and that is, if people are not respecting it, this deck can kill you on turn 2 or turn 3, consistently, especially on turn 3. I don't know how many times in a 5-match thing that I had a hand that if my opponent didn't have the right interaction, they were dead on turn 3. There aren't too many other decks in the format that can do that. I don't even know... Yawgmoth might have a draw that can do it, but I know Rhinos can't. Living End kind of basically makes you dead on turn 3, but you're not actually dead on turn 3. Scam, kind of the same thing. You're kind of dead, but not dead on turn 3, etc. So Amulet's really the one deck that just absolutely, you're dead on turn 3 if you don't have the right interaction. Now, that said, the format has kind of caught up with the deck. Lots of Blood Moons running around, Ashioks running around, instant speed interaction, Force of Vigors, yada, yada, yada. So the deck is a little bit weaker than it has been, but still probably the most powerful deck in the format, and more people are picking it up. So number 3 on our top 5 list. Number 2, we've already alluded to it a number of times, despite taking a hit in the form of a loss of Fury, this is still one of the top decks in the format, and that is Cascade Teamer Rhinos. You start with a Broken Modern Horizons card, mix in some other Broken Modern Horizons cards, mix in even more Broken Modern Horizons cards, throw in a Broken Lost Caverns of Ixalan, throw in a Broken Lord of the Rings card, and you have a recipe for a very good Modern deck. Not to mention one of the few decks that has the option of playing fast mana in the form of Gemstone Cavern. Flame of Anor is just a nice modal card, especially in the presence of Tishana's Tidebinder and one or two Mutavaults running around these lists. It's a deck that gets to play both of the broken utility lands from Kamigawa. So overall, very powerful deck. It does have some of the same weaknesses as Living End, except it doesn't fight through as many hate pieces, because you really only get hit by the Cascade hit pieces. You don't get hit by the anti-graveyard stuff that Living End has to deal with. So, and this deck has a little bit better of a tempo game plan, with Force of Negation, Tishana's Tidebinder, Brazen Borrower, Subtlety, and Endurance than Living End does. Living End can play some of those same cards, but not nearly as effective as Rhinos can. So this deck's a little bit better of a tempo game B plan than Living End. Makes it number 2 on the list, plus the fact that it has a fairly good matchup against both Yawgmoth and Rakdos Scam, leaving it in a fairly good place in the meta. And number 1, Yawgmoth combo. Now, this deck is somewhat like a Malia combo in the Pioneer format, in that you get to play this one powerful centerpiece card and everything else is kind of built around it. Now, where it differs from a deck like Amalia, or even a deck like some of its predecessors like Heli Ballista combo or Kitchen Finks Viscera Seer combo, or any of those kind of iteration weird decks, Yawgmoth is a reasonable mid-range deck outside of that. You get to play Grist the Hunger Tide, which for some reason they templated this Planeswalker as a creature when it's not on the battlefield, which is just kind of insane. The rest of the deck, Delayed Halfling making your key stuff uncounterable, Young Wolf and Strangleroot Geist giving you a little bit of a beatdown, playing along with Apatra and Orcish Bowmasters. You get to play a lot of utility creatures, you get to play, Haywire Mites and, Fulminator Mages, Reclamation Sages, Scavenging Oozes, Questing Beasts if you so chose, Shoulder of the Apocalypse. You just get to play all of these like one-of bullets because of your Eldritch Evolutions and Chord of Callings. And then Agatha's Soul Cauldron just took this deck to another level. It's one of 2 decks along with Hardened Skills that really benefit from the printing of this card. Basically, it can turn anything in your deck into a Yawgmoth or a Grist or a Wall of Roots, or any of these other activated ability things. It just kind of gets stupid when you have, like, say a Grist gets put under an Agatha's Soul Cauldron and you have 3 creatures with +1/+1 counters on. All of a sudden, you've got 3 pests every turn, and your blue-white control opponent can do nothing about it. Plus you get to play Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, other interactive cards in your sideboard. You get to play multiple copies of Beseiju. There's not really much this deck doesn't do. And for that reason, it is the top deck in the Modern format. Now, a little bit of a sidebar on the format overall. Now, I have been down on the Modern format for a little bit of time, and I think a lot of that is results bias. A lot of the decks I was playing wasn't doing well for a time, and maybe Modern is not the most fun that it's ever been, but Modern is in a weird kind of balance right now. There's no one deck that's overly powered. A lot of decks see play. Scam was kind of on the climb, and arguments become the number 1 deck again. But its results just don't back up the numbers it's playing. And I think I said that even when we were jokingly playing Scam on the channel to try to get the deck banned, is I just didn't feel like the amount of people that were playing the decks that hated out Scam or that were difficult matches for Scam were being played. And I still don't know that that's true. I still don't know, like in leagues and stuff, you see enough Rhinos and whatnot. So, that said, Leagues, challenges, higher events, they're a little bit different animal. Leagues, sometimes people just play what they have. Sometimes people play for speed. I know personally I like to play decks that go through leagues faster, both because my time is a little bit limited because of obviously work, family, all that kind of stuff. You know, and I just enjoy decks with, quite simply, less decisions. Leagues go a little bit faster, even if they're not the best deck in the format. You know, I value my time. I'd rather play 2 1-hour burn leagues than I would sit through a 2.5-hour Jund league, for instance. But I digress. But Modern's in a weird place, and until Modern Horizons 3 comes out, it's really kind of hard to see what direction the format will go in. But that is currently where the Modern format sits here in February of 2024. Once again, if you like Modern content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Hope to see you for our next video.